A news article on the BBC boasted, "Lost City found beneath Cuban waters." This exciting news came from a team of explorers headed by Pauline Zalitsky, a marine engineer, and her husband, Paul Weinswig. Their company worked side by side with the Cuban government to try to uncover hundreds of treasure-laden ships from the Spanish colonial era. What they uncovered using their advanced sonar equipment was far more mysterious.
According to what they reported, Weinswig and Zalitsky had made a deal with Fidel Castro in order to do side-scan sonar readings of the seafloor around Cuba. They were looking for sunken Spanish treasure galleons in order to have gold that might be found. The gold would then be split 50-50 between them and Cuba, and nobody else had gotten these rights before, so it was very exciting. When they used the sonar on the seabed, what they found was not sunken gold. They found incredible architectural monuments down there, and these monuments were specifically located off the western tip of Cuba, about a half-mile below sea level, in very harsh ocean currents that make it almost impossible to have anything go down there except for some of the best submersibles. What they saw was these side-scan sonar readings that were pyramid-like buildings, long roads, all kinds of clearly megalithic stone architecture, and what we hear from some of the original reports was that they signed an exclusive deal with National Geographic magazine, that this whole story was going to go public in the summer of 2003, and well, that obviously did not happen. In the meantime, Pauline Zalitsky was leaking information about those discoveries that they were revealing, and according to Zalitsky's reports, she was using a submersible and saw that there were sphinxes down there, and that there were bizarre inscriptions on the stones. And remember, we're dealing with something that could not have possibly been above sea level for at least 11,000 years. She had submersible footage of a pyramid down there that has kind of a change in its slope angle as it goes halfway up, kind of similar to the bent pyramid of Djoser in Egypt. So we're seeing a direct relationship between these monuments and what we see in Egypt. That to me is astonishing, because it suggests that the Egyptian pyramids as well may have been built at the same time and are therefore far older than the assumptions of conventional archaeology. There it is right down there. It's obviously artificial, and then the whole story somehow got suppressed.
Zalitsky estimated that it would have taken over 11,000 years for such a structure to have sunken to the depth at which these structures were said to be found. Strangely, after they released their findings, the news outlets and networks went dark. What might they have stumbled upon?
When we talk about submerged cities, we're lending credibility to the emerging evidence of cyclic civilization. The question is, how far back do those civilizations go? First, they appear to occur in 5,000-year cycles. The historic context of civilizations going back 50, 60, 70,000 years along these 5,000-year cycles shows up in the mythology. Maybe the mythology is based on much more fact than we've been led to believe in the past, or that we've been willing to embrace in the past.
If this structure underneath the ocean floor sank possibly 11,000 years or more ago, could this be a link to the infamous Atlantis?
Atlantis is almost a catch-all term for trying to find the origins of civilization itself. This probably goes back to the 19th century when the US congressman by the name of Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book that was to become the seminal work on Atlantis. It was entitled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And in here, what he proposed was that all of the civilizations of the ancient world and the New World, the Americas, had a mother civilization as its source. All of the information that's been left to us on Atlantis by Plato, the Greek philosopher who wrote around 350 BC, suggests that we should be looking for Atlantis somewhere in the area of the Bahamas and the Caribbean. But because of Ignatius Donnelly's ideas to do with a mother civilization, Atlantis therefore becomes this concept more than an actual drowned city. I believe that Atlantis existed. I believe that a high culture probably peopled those massive islands of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and they may well have been drowned and destroyed in the Great Cataclysm, the so-called Younger Dryas event.
I think I need to explain the Younger Dryas. Let's first of all consider the world during the Ice Age. Everybody's heard of the Ice Age. What was the Ice Age? The last Ice Age set in about 125,000 years ago. And it saw the buildup of giant ice caps, primarily on top of North America and on top of Northern Europe. Exactly why the Ice Age happened is still a subject that scientists argue about. But it's not in dispute that an ice cap 2 miles deep sat on top of North America and a huge area of Northern Europe, that same 2-mile deep ice cap. It reaches its maximum extent about 21,000 years ago. The temperatures are warming almost actually to modern levels, and the ice is beginning to disappear. And then suddenly, 12,800 years ago, really suddenly, literally overnight, everything changes, and the Earth is plunged back into a massive deep freeze. This is a time of huge extinction of species are wiped out. The new evidence that is providing coherent sense to this is called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and it has been put forward by a large group of mainstream credentialed scientists. And what they've said is that they have found evidence which suggests the Earth was hit by several fragments of a comet. For a long time, the comet was out there. It was probably a very spectacular visual presence, but it wasn't hitting the Earth. But 12,800 years ago, by which time that comet had begun to fragment, had broken up into lots of fragments. And the estimates are that 4 of those fragments, 4 large fragments, hit the North American ice cap. It's literally beyond imagination. That instant of impact would have created so much heat that it would have melted large areas of the North American ice cap and sent the water flooding south. Then within a matter of days or weeks of that release of water, the freezing temperature has begun, and there's no more release of water. The world goes dry at that point and into a very deep, dark, frozen period accompanied by animal extinctions. The Younger Dryas lasts for 1,200 years. It lasts from 12,800 years ago to 11,600 years ago. And then something else really weird happens. The Earth's been in a deep freeze. Suddenly, 11,600 years ago, you get a second massive pulse of meltwater into the world ocean. One very strong suggestion is that the Earth intersected again with the debris stream of the same comet, and that there were further impacts 11,600 years ago. But those impacts were not on ice. Those impacts were entirely oceanic. You get big comet impacts in an ocean, and what you're going to get, as well as extraordinary tidal waves, what you're going to get is a massive amount of water vapor thrown up into the upper atmosphere. And that water vapor creates a greenhouse effect, which accounts for the very radical warming of the Earth. It has to be rather intriguing that that's the exact date, 11,600 years ago, that Göbekli Tepe is founded. And it has to be even more intriguing that 11,600 years ago is the exact date that Plato gives us for the destruction and disappearance beneath the flood of the ocean of the lost civilization of Atlantis.
If what Graham Hancock is telling us is true about the Younger Dryas, where can we see evidence elsewhere on the planet?
The flood also did sink many other areas of megalithic architecture, such as the gorgeous pyramid that we see in the Azores off the coast of Portugal, what we see around the coast of India, what we see in Japan, where you have sunken architecture down there, all kinds of stuff that's coming up that defies a conventional view.
As a matter of fact, just a couple of years ago, a little further away from Malta, in the Sicily Channel, was discovered a giant, absolutely nobody's disputing, man-made megalith lying on the bottom of the ocean. And that bit of ocean was covered by the rising sea levels more than 9,000 years ago, which makes it already 3,000 to 4,000 years older than the established date for the monumental temples on the island of Malta itself.
Some experts, like Jack Carey, have done some alternative research that might coincide with the science behind the Younger Dryas.
As far as the sunken pyramids go in the oceans of the world, a lot of that can be tied to research being done by Dr. Courtney Brown and his group of very skilled remote viewers. And they're beginning to not only target what they described as being Atlantis, but through their remote viewings, they're beginning to ascertain that it was this very science that caused the downfall of the society, that they used it in such a way that it literally caused a destruction of the landmass, and that may have actually been part of some sort of conflict or war that was going on. The fact that there's just so many of them all around the world is what's fascinating. Humanity has not come together in any way, shape, or form the way we would want or hope or expect or love for it to do ever since the Tower of Babel, ever since we were spread all over the earth.
A conflict? What kind of conflict could Dr. Courtney Brown and his researchers be picking up on? Ancient texts from the Greek philosopher Plato explain in great detail the destruction of Atlantis by Zeus as payback for human arrogance. The legend describes the founder of the great city to be half god and half human and ruled by Poseidon. As punishment for their immoral bankruptcy, Zeus sent a ball of fire to destroy the aquatic cities. The curator of the Joseph Campbell collection draws some parallels from Plato's story and a similar tale between two warring Sumerian gods.
It is very possible that the Greek story, the one we find in Plato about a lost continent, Atlantis, ruled over by Poseidon, the god of the oceans, that this has earlier roots. After all, storytellers in those times borrowed from other stories, and we can follow. It's called syncretic, the way information, images, and narratives move from one culture to another, particularly if they're relatively geographically close by, which in this case is true. Sure, Enki, the great god of the Sumerian traditions, could have been the Poseidon figure, and the destroyer god could have come from the Sumerian tradition. This is not only possible, it is likely. Zeus is the name we are familiar with from the Greek tradition that comes and punishes the people of Atlantis who have achieved so much because they started taking it for granted.
What could the people of Atlantis have taken for granted? How could they have become immorally bankrupt? Could this be another interpretation of a god figure striking down upon humans for knowing too much?
What I can tell you is that there is a recollection in Sumerian myth and tradition of a time before the flood, when a high civilization existed and when cities existed, and then the flood came and everything was reset and started again. So what's of interest to me in that is the recollection of the memory of something before the flood, something major, something important before the flood.
Could there be a connection between the Greek version of Atlantis and the Sumerian gods?
Je m'intéresse vraiment, mes travaux vraiment se focalisent tout particulièrement entre...
I think it is interesting because we thought for a long time that Plato had been taught by Egyptian priests. But thanks to the Edfu text, we wonder if he actually had the copies in hand. We will never know. But there are very similar elements between the Plato version of the Atlantis and the Egyptian Edfu text of Atlantis I translated. And we can understand, in a few words, that Osiris, who is considered to be the Sumerian god Enki, fled Mesopotamia to help start a new civilization, according to the doctrine of Enlil, and he flees to Atlantis and settles down on some islands in the Atlantic Ocean. This ancient territory is mentioned in some funerary texts, such as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They call it La Mata, which can be roughly translated by the water crown of Ta. Ta is one of Osiris's names. It is the Egyptian name for Enki. Like all the other gods, he had many different names. We understand that Ta settles on some islands, and we can identify similar data to that of Plato's writings. In the Edfu versions of the Atlantis, there are always attacks from the forces of Set. Set is, of course, Enlil. We understand that he went all the way to Egypt, even all the way to Morocco, Azores, and the Canary Islands. Set doesn't stop attacking Osiris's islands. Another interesting element to this story, there is a technology that Egyptian gods used for protection, the Djed pillars. They place them around the city. Apparently, some are even on the water. The texts call them floaters. They can protect the city, and we can understand in parts of the text that thanks to the energy coming from these Djed pillars, Egyptians can control water and create water walls, very thick ones, in order to protect the city. Many mythologies and legends have similarities. We understand that Osiris could actually be Poseidon or Neptune, and Enlil, in some ways, could be Zeus.
What is interesting to note is Poseidon is always pictured with a pitchfork that was later connected with the biblical pitchfork of Satan by the Catholic Church. If Enki is connected to this interpretation, could the destruction of Atlantis be the story of Yahweh's wrath on advanced humanity? Anton Parks suggests there is a connection between the scientific version of the Cataclysm and the Egyptian texts.
Assez régulièrement parce que en fait, l'Atlantis.
The Egyptian Atlantis must have lasted long enough in history that it is part of Egyptian culture. Funerary texts mention it quite often. Indeed, the Egyptian Atlantis, La Meta, corresponds to the West. It also means the West in Egyptian. And West is also where you bury the dead. We see that the idea remains that when you go towards the West, there were many deaths. In Egyptian history, Osiris's death happens at the same time as another very singular element, which takes place in the sky. It is the fall of the Eye of Sound found in the Edfu text. This is the destruction of a planet which was in between Mars and Jupiter. This is where we find the asteroid belt, and I believe that a planet used to be there. The death of Osiris is at this point in the story.
In 1950, Emanuel Velikovsky published a book called Worlds in Collision. In this book, he discusses that Venus was ejected from Jupiter as a comet and this passed near Earth, causing catastrophes mentioned in mythologies around the world. Could Anton's translations of the Sumerian text explain this very moment in human history and how it relates to the flood?
Selon moi, il s'agirait de...
In the Edfu text that I translated, they mention the fall of the Eye of Sound. Let me explain. In my opinion, Venus was located close to Mulgay. It was one of its satellites. And when Mulgay exploded, its satellite, Venus, is ejected into the solar system. And at some point, it comes very close to Earth. Then there is Osiris's death. According to the text, this was the work of Enlil, who prepared his attack, both on Earth and in the sky. He really wanted to make history and impact significantly the gods' history. He was not going to be defeated by earthly technology. Venus was ejected into the solar system, turned inside it for thousands of years, before eventually placing itself where it is today. Enlil must have really wanted to finally put an end to the lengthy war he was waging against Enki Osiris. and he came close with the death of Osiris.
Que lorsqu'Isis décide de faire revenir Osiris dans un nouveau corps qui sera le corps d'Horus, dans la Grande Pyramide.
But then a second event, the story tells us. And luckily for history in general, Osiris comes back as Horus and the battle can start again. There are many elements that explain these events and that describe how Horus arrives to destroy the evil of the world in order to avenge his father's death. This explains a similar catastrophic event that happened at the same time, such as the destruction of Atlantis. This arrival is most likely a comet, who is actually Horus, according to Sumerian text. And this is also when the so-called flood happened, about 10,000 years ago.
Could these ancient Sumerian texts be explaining a battle for the power over Earth? And the destruction not only on the planet, but in the sky? Ancient texts suggest that whoever survived this cataclysm survived to tell the story in Egypt.
Plato tells us where the story came from. It came from an ancestor in his family line, Solon, a famous Greek lawmaker, who visited Egypt around 600 BC. And in that visit, he encountered Egyptian priests who told him the story that there had been a high civilization in remote antiquity that had been destroyed in a cataclysm and submerged beneath the sea, that there were survivors. Some of those survivors came to Egypt and founded what would become the great civilization of Egypt in due course.
1937, a podiatrist named Doc Noss discovered a cache of Apache gold on what is now the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Scouting a rocky outcropping called Victorio Peak while deer hunting, Noss took refuge from the heavy rainstorm in a cave. Exploring, he stumbled upon an old mine shaft that led him to thousands of crudely smelted gold bars stacked in rows like bricks. Tragically, Noss was never able to cash in on this treasure because, whilst using explosives in an attempt to widen the cave's opening, he mistakenly created a landslide that sealed it forevermore. The legend of Noss's lost gold gained widespread attention. Where did the riches he had seen come from originally? Theories abound, from the repository of a 19th century Apache war chief to a secret stash from the Aztecs. Treasure hunters world over have come to Victorio's Peak to find Noss's fortune, but none have been successful. Many believe the lost treasure is still buried somewhere in rubble and possibly guarded by the military. Is it possible ancient treasure from a lost civilization lay buried beneath Victorio's Peak? And if so, what else could be beneath this strange area? Researchers like Gregg Braden point out that there is more to this area than gold. There is actually a much more ancient system that stretches over 4 states.
What we found in these areas, not so much that there is a hollow space under the desert, but there is a tunnel system, a network that connects many of the indigenous traditions in this part of the world from the area in southwestern Colorado, northern New Mexico, down towards Wild Horse Mesa. And it is this natural system of caverns that the native people say many of their traditions relate to. So they were created naturally through volcanic environments, and then they were modified to become more useful over later generations. But what the ancestors say is that in the past, this is where people have lived when the cataclysms of the past destroyed the surface of the earth. And now we have physical evidence in New Mexico and Colorado. The geologic evidence does not support the hollow earth theory in the sense of a complete space in the center of the earth. It does support within the crust itself a series of tunnels and catacombs that were created naturally and have been known and used by our ancestors, by native peoples in the past.
It's interesting that we find this idea of treasures within the earth, hidden gold, and things of this nature that actually tie in with Native American lore. For instance, you have Chicamastok, the 7 caves or the 7 cities of gold from the Aztec stories. You have to wonder, how much truth there is to it. At the same time, you have this whole idea that goes back to stories of the underworld containing treasure, whether it's the dwarves or it's the alchemists looking for gold in the depths of the earth.
Now, these sites are very controversial because they force historians to rethink the traditional story.
Could this be true? Many of these underground caverns in North America are located in the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. This rugged and arid geographic land, also known as the Colorado Plateau, is predominantly owned by Native American tribes, including the Hopi Nation. In Hopi folklore, it is written that the Indians' ancestors climb onto the surface of our Earth from an underworld. This indigenous tribe believes that the current incarnation of mankind is the fourth world, and that the prior 3 occurred inside the Earth.
What's intriguing about the Hopi tradition is the notion of previous cycles of civilization that comes across, which are brought to an end cataclysmically, and then there's a re-emergence and another cycle of civilization occurs. That's the message that I take from the Hopi traditions, that they are urging us to cast our minds back into remote prehistory, and they're saying we are not recent comers. We lived through a series of cataclysms, and we remade the earth each time after those cataclysms. When you look at the actual structures on the ground in that area, if you go to Chaco Canyon or places like this, but there's the suggestion that we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a much older heritage behind all of this.
If this indeed is just the tip of the iceberg to something far more mysterious, what other evidence could suggest that there is an unseen power in this area? Freddie Silva brings us to another location in the Four Corners called Shiprock.
I've seen grown men weep at the sight of Shiprock, or if you want to call it by its real name, Sebitai. And it's one of the most powerful places on Earth for a number of reasons. One, it's described as a navel of the Earth. And any place called a navel of the Earth is essentially a power point, as you'd expect from a navel. And it's a place of beginning where the Anasazi are said to, and I quote, land here from Venus on a metal bird. And when the bird recognized that the people were safe, the bird went into the ground and rose up as Shiprock. You can see it for about 60 miles in any direction. It's a sacred spot. We should respect that. It's one of those few places on Earth where I feel I can actually hear the braves singing and dancing around me and actually join in. It sounds like the craziest thing, but the energy is so unadulterated, so powerful, so potent, it doesn't have to show it. It is itself. And you are suddenly reminded that you're actually crossing a veil. It's hard to put into words unless you've experienced this, but that's the power of a place like that.
Could this navel of the Earth be a place where people could cross over into other dimensions?
When it comes to exploring Native American lore, and in particular legends about the underworld, the Four Corners area is particularly important because we have a number of Native American groups that claim to have emerged there. And by that I mean they have an emergence myth that says that they came out of the earth. The Pueblo people believed that they had come out of the earth in that area, around the Grand Canyon area. We have the Hopi, who claim they came out of what they call the Sipapu, which is basically the name for a little hole as part of their chimney system in Akiva. But they claim that they had to come out of something they called the Sipapu, and they had come out of the underworld where they had interacted with reptilian humanoids called the snake people and the lizard people. And they had also interacted with another group called the ant people. The ant people are described basically in a way that sounds very much like so-called descriptions of modern-day gray aliens. We have this whole idea here that there's a series of worlds beneath and they all have their own inhabitants, and that these Native American people said they had come up through these various regions to eventually emerge in our world. We have the Apache, who have a similar legend that says they came through a series of caverns to our world after they lived in a place called the Old Fireland, which had been destroyed in a cataclysm and had sunk beneath the ocean. And they claimed that they had come here through a series of caverns, just as the Aztecs said. We also have the Navajo, and the Navajo believed that they came out of the underworld as well. So these are themes that all tie into the Four Corners area, and it's very interesting that the various people, some of them were even adversaries in previous centuries, that they all have similar legends about worlds within our world.
If the premise that modern mankind originated from caverns deep below the earth is true, then is it also possible that there are entire civilizations still living underground in the Four Corners region?
I live near Taos, New Mexico, and there is a phenomenon that is called the hum, the Taos hum, H-U-M. It is a vibration that is felt selectively by some people. Other people don't seem to know it at all. It usually happens between 2 and 4 a.m. when a lot of people are sleeping. And the hum, it's right on the verge of where you feel it in your heart and where you can just below the audible level. And no one knows where this hum is coming from. They brought in university researchers back in the 1980s to try to triangulate where, if they could find 3 locations where they found the hum and triangulate, they could find the source. And what they found was that it's coming from everywhere, suggesting that there is a vibration happening within the earth during those periods of time, 2, 3, 4 a.m., that is being carried through the bedrock into these other areas. What is the source of that vibration? This is where the speculation comes in, that these natural tunnels and the caves and the caverns that our ancestors have talked about in the past that already exist are being modified, perhaps, and used in modern ways for storage, for earth sensing, geosensing applications and things like that. So that is where the scientific community kind of has arrived, is that there is something, they think maybe it is the drilling, the constant drilling to modify these caverns that's creating the vibration.
Since 1946, the U.S. government has been using Hopi land in the Four Corners region for explosive testing. Is it possible that, in fact, these tests are a cover-up? Could the military be using the ancient power of this area to run covert military programs? Or could their true agenda be to destroy something that was discovered underground, perhaps something from an ancient galaxy? Billy Carson entails his personal encounter at the Four Corners area.
It appears that a lot of this activity and a lot of these tunnels congregate close to this Four Corners area. Now, there's well-known stone-based stargates, is what the ancient Indians call them, and now the modern Indians are saying these are where their relatives used to go and put their heads in and actually chant some words and disappear. And then some of them will return. Last summer, I went to Arizona to see the Grand Canyon. We actually hired a helicopter and a guide to go down there because I wanted to find out if I can see any of these ancient mysteries that people had been talking about. And we landed on this Indian reservation down inside the canyon. And there's a special area that was cordoned off. So I said to the guy, I said, why can't I come over here? I don't understand. I don't see anything dangerous. He said, because NASA has taken over this part of the canyon. The way the grid system runs across the Earth, there are several places that are just like heavily energetic nodes. You'll find on many of these reservations and other holy lands held by natives that military groups have gone in and built facilities and made them off limits. Most of the time, these are actual entrances to this cavern system that honeycombs the entire Earth. A lot of these places are sacred to natives because they have stories going back many millennia of different types of beings taking them below the earth before cataclysms to protect them, and these are the same beings that after the cataclysm would bring them back to the surface of the earth to help them set up their civilizations again. A lot of these areas that the military will lock down are also very strong vortexes, which basically are nodes in this cosmic web stargate system. These are places that the military lock down because they don't want you to see what's coming and going through these gates.
A lockdown? If this is true, who or what could possibly be traveling through these gates or in these underground caverns? Perhaps we should consider one of the less conventional theories of evolution. If it is possible that the DNA of human beings was originally bioengineered by ancient terrestrials, could this be a link? William Bramley points out how this idea is explained in Hopi folklore.
You have this possibility, at least within the lore. You don't necessarily exclude skyborn gods from gods that lived underground, because people had both ideas, that the gods had realms underground, underwater, and in the sky, and they interacted with all of them. We already know there are very large caverns here and there. It may be, for example, that the South American tribe, maybe the Hopi, maybe they found some of these at one time, or at least they found caverns big enough where they believe that some of these things could transpire. So it's not necessarily a contradiction. It just means that the gods operated in these different realms.
When we look at the creation stories of our past, as different as they are from one another, there are common themes that weave them all together. I find this fascinating because it is the local understanding of a common heritage, I believe, that is preserved in the traditions of the modern indigenous peoples. One of the most obvious of these common threads is the theme of another world beneath this one, a world, subterranean world, from which our ancestors emerged.
A lot of these themes from Native American folklore have found their way into modern day accounts of what I call modern folklore, which would be ufology, cryptozoology, all these types of things, conspiracy literature. Really, all this stuff is just an update of folklore. It's the same stuff that people have done for centuries. Sometimes it contains truth, sometimes it contains fabrications, sometimes people elaborate on what they think something means. But we see these ideas of underworlds involved with variety of peoples around the world now emerging in these same areas. All these things touch on the same type of material.
With these subterranean creation stories of the world from which our ancestors emerged, is there perhaps a code or a treasure that could have been left for us to figure out the truth of humanity's connections to the Four Corners?
New Mexico, Arizona, the whole area around the Four Corners, and Utah, of course, and southern Colorado, it's actually one of the most spiritually active parts of North America. And this is why that part of America is it draws so many people. Some of them might know it, some of them don't, but they are drawn there nevertheless. I think it's because the land is worked with. The land is a living organism. If you work with it, just like watering a plant, it gives you something back. It gives you back a certain pleasure, and that's what you're attracted to. So that's why that part of the country is so important, because it's still alive. It's worked with on a daily basis, and you can feel that as you just drive through it. There is the Navajo sites, there is Mesa Verde as well, there is Bandelier, there's a kiva up on Bandelier that if you happen to go there at the end of the day and time it so you don't get caught up inside the park, you have to climb up a 100-foot ladder. And that place is perfectly positioned inside the natural cave in a really awkward area of the park, because that's the one spot where the Earth's telluric currents just happen to cross. You know, and they're everywhere. These currents are everywhere. But they built this sacred site exactly where those currents cross, and you go inside the kiva, and you have this out-of-body experience, because this energy is made of the same stuff that we're made of. It's literally just giving you a means, a technology in which to escape the physical world and connect to another level of reality.
Gregg Braden takes us deep into another structure in the Four Corners area that may give us an insight into how this location connects to the sky and what may lie below.
One of the greatest mysteries that we're finding of ancient civilization is right in our own backyard for those of us that live in the United States, in the high deserts of northern New Mexico, Chaco Canyon. Something happened in Chaco Canyon 1,100 plus years ago that we have never seen in the history of the world before, and we never saw duplicated since that time. We still do not know precisely who the people were that built Chaco Canyon, where they came from, why they had the advanced technology, why they had the mathematics, why they had the astronomy, the architecture, the ability to grow food in one of the most harshest environments. It's 12 miles long, 2 miles wide in some places. Within the canyon itself, there are over 2,800 archaeological sites that have been recognized. Of those 2,800, 32 have been excavated, and because they cannot be sustained, many of them were reburied to preserve them for later generations. 12 are now restored, and it's those 12 that are telling the story. That is opening the door to forbidden territory when it comes to archaeology, advanced civilizations of our past. One of the most notable places in Chaco Canyon is Pueblo Bonito. It is a very unique D-shaped architectural complex. Over 900 rooms were built into this Pueblo Bonito. Some of them are square, some of them are the circular chambers, the kivas, that play such a significant role in the traditions of the native peoples throughout the desert Southwest. And one of the reasons that this circular chamber is so important is because it ties directly into their creation story. In the circular chambers, in the kivas, there was a place at one end of the kiva called the sipapu. And the sipapu, in the native traditions, is where our ancestors from the past emerged from another world beneath this world. They emerge into this world time and time again. This ties in beautifully to some of the creation stories that we find everywhere from Sumeria to the Mesoamerican traditions in the Yucatan. There's a common theme that runs through all of these stories, and that common theme is that the people emerge from a world that is underneath, it is below the world that we know now.
Is this yet another reference to human creation beneath the surface? What might be Chaco Canyon's connection to the stars?
When the Viking missions began sending back the images from Mars, over 19,000 images from the orbiter as it was circling. And as those images now have been refined and we have a better sense of what they are, lo and behold, there is on the surface of Mars a temple complex that looks precisely like an unexcavated Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, the very unique D-shaped structure that we find nowhere else on this planet in the past. It's nothing that we find contemporary. The only other place we find an example of this structure is on the surface of Mars. Now, the people of Chaco Canyon, we don't know, as I mentioned, precisely who they are, but we know that they had an advanced understanding of physics, of astronomy and mathematics. There's a place in Chaco, a 400-foot tall butte called Fajada Butte. And at the top of Fajada Butte is a mysterious structure that scientists are now calling the North American Stonehenge. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know that to look at it because there are 3 vertical slabs made of the same material as the native Earth. In the 1970s, it was recognized that on the solstice and on the equinox, the way the sun comes and the light shines through these slabs against a spiral design on the wall at the back of the slabs, it actually pinpoints precisely the summer solstice and the equinox, as well as lunar cycles. And this was something that has never been seen before. It's so rare that scientists were reluctant to even embrace the possibility that it was actually happening. And it was only when laser-guided imagery was used to mimic the solstices and the equinoxes at different times of year that scientists were able to pinpoint precisely that, yes, this is what was happening on Fajada Butte.
If the Four Corners area holds some kind of power beneath the earth that humans might have emerged from, is it possible that the inhabitants of Chaco Canyon built these locations to connect with an ancient spacefaring race beyond Earth?
What the scientists found was that from Chaco Canyon were a series of roads that radiate in perfect lines from Chaco into other archaeological sites like Hovenweep and Mesa Verde, for example, and the Aztec National Monument. Perfect lines, perfect roads. When they reached a rock or a boulder in the middle of the road, they didn't go around. They went right up over. They're absolutely perfect. And part of the reason this is a mystery is because these people had no wheels. What were they using? A perfect road, absolutely straight, 36 inches wide with no wheels in their culture. What were they using these roads for? This is one of the mysteries that the scientists are looking at now, because it appears that Chaco was never inhabited to the full extent that it could have been. It had the ability to sustain thousands and thousands of people, but there's no evidence that those thousands of people ever lived there. So now the thinking is that it was a gathering place during very specific times that were predicted and calculated by Fajardo Butte, where people from the other traditions would converge on Chaco using these roads. And many of the astronomical images that we're seeing now link Chaco to what we see happening in Venus, what we see happening on Mars. So it's very possible that what we're seeing in Chaco Canyon is an example of an advanced technology using the materials that are available in this world to mimic and duplicate a knowledge and a wisdom that has been known from somewhere in the past.
Could Chaco Canyon be mimicking something more ancient than we know today? Andrew Collins suggests that the ancient people were following a pathway of the skies that would lead them home. Is it possible these ancient people had a different understanding of their existence here?
The soul comes from, let's say, the sky world, up there somewhere, and returns there at the point of death. But there's something more beyond that, that some part of us comes from the stars themselves, and that at the point of incarnation, that something, we call it the soul or the spirit, embodies within flesh and blood and exists, and that this gives us this connection to the stars, that the soul or spirit actually comes from an extraterrestrial or a starry source, and that when we're released at the point of death, it goes back from whence it came. But in connection with this were various stars that were seen as personification of influences and intelligences that were either markers on that route to reach the sky world, or helped or enabled the soul as supernatural beings to achieve that aim. There seems to be a consistent route, and that route would seem to have been, symbolically at least, and maybe in actuality in some manner, connected with the Milky Way, what we can see of the edge of the Milky Way, this bright, beautiful, starry stream that comes up from the horizon, goes, arches over our heads, down to the other horizon. Something that we barely perceive today, living in urban environments for the most part. But if you go to, remote parts of the world in its totality, and it's beautiful, and you don't understand just how important this would have been to our ancestors, seeing something like this rising up into the sky. And the ancestors believed that this was the route. They called it the path of souls in Native American tradition.
If these ancient people did have this knowledge, how is this connected to what might lie below the four corners?
Breakaway civilizations and things of that nature. The ancient civilizations like pre-Adamites, if these beings created a high level of civilization before we did, they may long ago have reached quantum computing levels, even using the crystalline structure of the earth itself to achieve godlike powers, and hence they became the gods to a lot of ancient people. So when you look at these ancient beings that are described in the ancient text, and you look at the modern day UFO accounts, you're probably really looking at the same beings, but that does not mean that they're coming from across the galaxy. There's a good bit of evidence that the Earth has been bombarded by various cataclysms over the ages, everything from asteroid impact to solar events. When these things happen, civilizations that might be on the surface are going to be devastated. There's really no way around this. I mean, if you don't know it's coming, then the effect on your civilization is going to be catastrophic. We find this again and again in stories about these ancient beings who preceded us here on the planet and who may still actually be here. Richard Shaver, who is the creator of something called the Shaver Mystery, he said that these beings fled underground when the radiation coming from the sun became so deadly, whereas before they lived for thousands of years, they quickly found that their solar radiation was destroying their DNA, and they fled beneath the surface of the earth, and they and their descendants, in a greatly modified form due to other types of radiation which are found inside the earth, are still there to this day. That's not to say that you wouldn't have to have a really advanced level of not just civilization, but technology in order to carve out a space inside the crust of the planet and to make a sustainable environment there. And of course, there are elements there which could provide this.
Sonia Grace uses her alternative research to dive even deeper into the layers of the Four Corners.
So I went back in time and spirit traveled to an ancient site that my guides took me to called Chaco Canyon. It's in the Four Corners of the Southwest. The Savrock immediately ushered us inside the rocks. There was like an opening and we went inside, and they said, "We want to show you this because this is what happened to the Anasazi people." We took them through this underground tunnel, and we literally returned the people that we could to the very place that they began before they migrated north, which was to the Mayan culture. The Savrock helped the Mayan people long time before that. The whole migration story of the Hopis, where they migrated in 4 directions, came out of an ancient culture down in Mexico. And this was very interesting that the Savrock would intervene and help some of these people back to this place. It's how they actually disappeared. The rest of them disappeared because the Anunnaki also came and took several of these people, hundreds of them, from the Anasazi community. This site and all of the Southwest is filled with portals. There's all kinds of energy going on there, especially extraterrestrial energy. There's all kinds of energy in the Southwest.
Could it be that what Doc Noss apparently stumbled across was ancient treasure from some of these cultures as they survived cataclysms? Is it possible that the Four Corners area holds a certain kind of energy that opens up doorways to other worlds? If this is true, how are Mayans and ancient cultures in Mexico attached to this area in the American Southwest?
The foundation of the Aztec nation. Now that location was known as Chicomostoc. That means the 7 caves. And this was like some kind of subterranean structure. One of them has them coming from a place called Aztlan. And this is suggested to be somewhere in the Southwest United States.
Could the mysterious Four Corners be linked to more ancient cultures that migrated south? Could this have been the location of the creation story for the Aztecs? The code continues to unravel. Maybe the answer to our question is buried right below our nose.
The Gnostic texts are found in Upper Egypt. Almost exactly the same time, the Dead Sea Scrolls are found in Israel as well.
Nag Hammadi is a small village along the Nile River in Egypt. And a young boy was tasked by his mother to find kindling, which was in very short supply because there are very few trees, there's no forests that grow along the Nile River in that part of Egypt. Being very resourceful, he went to what he knew were old grave sites and old tombs, and he found papyrus books that were bound. These are the Gnostic texts. And it wasn't until someone recognized, a neighbor recognized what it was that he had, that the Department of Antiquities in Cairo became aware, and of course they moved very quickly to preserve the remaining documents. So the Nag Hammadi Library, it is the most complete record of the Old Testament, and the reason it's so controversial is because it contains many of the books that have not been seen since the church edited them in the 4th century.
Now, I don't want to get mystical or spooky, but it's as though something is at work to not allow us to be blinded and silenced. Something is at work to allow these ancient ideas to come back into the world. And Gnosticism has indeed come back into the world. I'll try to reconstruct the situation. In the early years of Christianity, really, from sort of 30 AD onwards through to about 400 AD, there are actually many different kinds of Christians, many different sects that regard themselves as Christians, as followers of Christ, but they have very different views. Amongst those early Christian sects were a group that called themselves Gnostics. They believed that there is a divine spark in humanity. The Gnostic mission was to liberate that divine spark, to provide us with the saving knowledge, to lead us to the revelation that would help us to understand the true nature of things. Not the illusory nature that's been created to hoodwink all of us, but the real, true nature of things.
What is life for Elon Musk?
Now you can see a video game that's photorealistic, almost photorealistic, and millions of people playing simultaneously. And you see where things are going with virtual reality. If you extrapolate that out into the future with any rate of progress at all, then eventually those games will be indistinguishable from reality. They'll be so realistic, you will not be able to tell the difference between that game and the reality as we know it. Well, how do we know that that didn't happen in the past and that we're not in one of those games ourselves?
Some believe this concept of a simulated universe originated from these ancient Gnostic texts that suddenly were discovered in 1945. These lost books named the creator of the universe as an aeon named Sophia. Sophia was considered to be a frequency, and her frequency would manifest into certain humans and the material realm. This myth of Sophia has challenged some to look at the universe differently than they have before.
The manifestation of Sophia, the personification of Sophia, might be representative of fractal energy and the fact that fractal energy fills the gaps between the symmetries of the very small and the very large. And it's this energy that we're basically saying is controlling this ancient technology, that all of this ancient technology is based upon that same idea, that it goes on and on through every single ancient teaching, that this idea that there is this all-encompassing unified energetic field makes a lot of sense that would be equated to Sophia. Fractal energy has a very deep relationship to the golden mean ratio, and the golden mean ratio is present in human DNA. That's what our DNA is based off of. And it's through this fractal energy and the fact that the golden mean ratio basically keeps it in check and keeps it going in a certain direction that we're able to derive a lot of new technology even today. It's something that they're beginning to rediscover, something Nikola Tesla had come across in his work. But it's interesting that these ancient civilizations were recording information like this and doing it in such a way that a parable could back up actual scientific information.
Could the ancient Gnostic texts be explaining not only the Creator, but the frequency in which the Creator exists through mathematics and quantum physics?
This third dimension is what we consider to be a holographic reality. It's not just me saying this, it's a lot of scientists have come forward now, a lot of scientists involved in supersymmetry and quantum physics, quantum mechanics, stating that the nature of the reality of the universe itself appears to be holographic in nature. So what scientists did was they did an experiment called the double slit experiment, where they put two little tiny microscopic slits and they put photons on the back, and they shot these photons through these slits. Well, when they weren't looking, the photon created a wave pattern on the back wall of this experiment. So they said, why? How can this be? How can individual photons create a wave pattern? So they went back and put a looking device, a camera, to see how the photons were going through these slits to create a wave pattern. They wanted to know how that could be. Well, when they did that, when they looked, it created a digital pattern on the back wall. So all of a sudden, it was a wow moment. The actual prospect of looking, in other words, conscious intervention, can change matter, can change the shape of the universe. So basically, it tells us that consciousness is really what is all that exists in the universe. The universe is pure consciousness. And what consciousness has actually done, it has actually recreated itself, or it actually split itself into pieces to experience itself subjectively. So consciousness wants to go out and it wants to create. And what it has done, it has gone out with these energies and it has created subjectively humans, planets, galaxies, so that it can experience itself from another perspective. And this is what we take from it from the quantum level in terms of these Sophia energies and some of these Gnostic energies. It appears that consciousness is the only thing that really exists and everything else seems to be an illusion.
Nassim Harameyn's been doing some really interesting work which does tie in very much to the old view of the ancients and the Gnostics in that it explains how creation transpires. What he's talking about in more of a metaphysics or quantum level is how existence comes to be. It's cosmogony, so it's how the cosmos comes to form, which to the Gnostics was the flow of reality from eternity into nature and back. This flow is actually represented by the goddess Sophia. She is the flow of reality itself, coming out from the pre-existent state of spirit.
But if this is true, why would this understanding of the universe and an aeon named Sophia be hidden beneath the sand for so long? The Sumerian texts allude to the same principle that a great administrator named Satam looked over the people of the Garden of Eden. His name in the Sumerian text was the god Enlil, and his hopes were to enslave the human race. He then appears in the garden as Yahweh, the biblical god. The serpent in the garden, however, was another Sumerian god named Enki, whose desire was to free the human race through knowledge. How did this concept of good and evil get so flipped upside down?
In 2003, we discovered a degeneration in the brain that seemed to be programmed due to a molecule called PP1. We don't know why. We cannot explain why. But at a certain point, humans have this incredible ability to forget. This molecule affects the brain, and it is a degeneration of memory. I think that there is a programmed blockage, which was performed on the human brain. What is interesting about great myths, whether it is for Native Americans or for Africans, very much as well, is that they have the ability to constantly recite those myths, their history, so as not to forget. Some people, the Hebrews as well probably, have managed to have this ability to pass on information across generations.
Could there really be a molecule that blocks our true remembering of who we are? Was this a programmed manipulation of our genetic code? This might explain our constant search for where we as humans originated from and who or what might be God.
The Garden of Eden to the Gnostics refers to the center principle from which all creation springs. So it's the pre-existent spirit of God, so to speak. So this is before time and space. So it's the circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. So everything that exists in this world pre-exists within what the Gnostics refer to as the pleroma, which means fullness.
It is hard to imagine where the pleroma could be located with our current point of view. Some say that it is linked to dimensions, but I think that inherently the idea of pleroma is more linked to frequency, another frequency.
If we go back to our understanding of quantum physics and the creation of matter, could this frequency transcend into our physical universe today? And how do the Gnostic texts explain this?
There's a pre-existent tension in the pleroma where the archetypal deities or archangels almost demand their expression or substantiation within the playing fields of creation itself, because they pre-exist in this state of light that they almost need to express these ideal forms that they represent. So what Sophia, the myth, kind of represents is the urge for them to create themselves.
The goddess Sophia, the Aeon, Sophia, whose name of course means wisdom. And she enters a trance-like dream state. And in that dream state, she envisages a singularity, the anthropos, humanity.
So she exits the pleroma and then falls into a state of deficiency. And in that state of deficiency, she splits. So there's a higher version of Sophia that remains in the pleroma, which is kind of like her celestial twin. And then the lower Sophia exits. It becomes the physical universe, the cosmic, the soul of the world, which is deficient because now evil is introduced into that, or a deficiency or a corruption.
As a result of that fall, tearing through the layers and levels of reality, is created the entity that the Gnostics call the demiurge. And he is also the creator of the physical earth and of the beings who dwell upon it. It is Sophia's work that inserted into the heart of humanity, deep within us, is this divine spark, that we are fundamentally creatures of spirit immersed in matter.
If Sophia is the creator of our divine spark, then could the demiurge be the creator of the matter we exist in? Is he the architect of our reality?
The demiurge becomes a representation of Sophia's irrational passions. So Sophia's irrational passions takes on the form of the demiurge, which also becomes the rulers of the archons.
According to Graham Hancock, the demiurge is what humans might refer to as the biblical God or creator of the universe. And this creator created himself, angels or demons, depending on how you look at it. And these archons help keep order in the universe.
The goddess Sophia is incarnated in the earth itself, but the earth is the domain of the demiurge. And the project of the demiurge is to get rid of that divine spark in humanity, to snuff it out, to stamp it out forever, so that we become entirely his creatures.
The archons, which were created by the demiurge, according to the Gnostic texts, stand between the human race and the great architect himself. In most cases, they are considered to be semi-hostile angels and demons.
The demiurge's motives were not that good, according to the Gnostics. And then the demiurge put and created these archons to be in charge of making sure that the universe stays intact as a prison for souls.
Every generation is a step lower, further from the perfect monad holiness, and they created worlds of their own. Now, they were only one step above pure evil, so these were corrupted worlds.
In the Gnostic text, specifically the Apocryphon of John, it gives a detailed account of the various archons. In this chapter, it suggests there are 7.
These actually correspond very nicely with the 7 planets. And the actual name of the planets in our tradition have very different names when they are called archons in the Gnostic tradition. Saturn in the Gnostic tradition is called Yaldabaoth or Samael. Jupiter is called Io. Mars is called Sabaoth. Venus is called Astaphanos. The Sun is called Adonaios. Mercury is called Eliaios. And the Moon is called Orarios. We now have an astrology where the planets appear to have influences on the personality and they vary from one to another. We have this opportunity to understand there is a ghost in the machine. Something is going on that takes the apparent mundane reality on the surface, veneer level, and you look past the veneer level and you see there is an organized plan in place.
Could the ghost in the system be the energy of Sophia reincarnating herself into goddess archetypes? And could these concepts of the demiurge and the archons coincide with some of the motivations of the characters in the Sumerian text?
This world is completely offset compared to our way of thinking. It really seems like science fiction. When we watch science fiction movies nowadays, we can find that the same themes are being explored. In Egyptian Gnostic texts, we find a recurrent main character. She is called Sophia. And this Sophia will become Tiamat, Tiamata from the Sumerian text. Tiamata can be decomposed in Ti, Amat, and Ta. The latter is not always added. In very concrete terms, it means Lady of Life. Amma is lady, and Ti is life. It is interesting to see that, right off, we get that she is a supreme goddess. Then we can actually find her in different mythologies. Tiamat is the archetype of the mother goddess, and as Sophia's spokesperson, is all-powerful. And according to the Sumerian text, she is going to create herself a lineage of females that we call Amashatum. This could be translated to the lizard mothers. In the Sumerian text, I think it's important to note that the Sophia energy is going to create a new being named An. You should know that the An particle also means the sky. That character is then going to create a people we find in Sumerian text. It is important to note that gods were created in artificial matrices. An creates Enki, and then Enki creates another son, who will become An's spokesperson for his agenda. His name is Enlil, and he will ceaselessly be against Enki in order to impede him and his knowledge from getting out to the humans. As soon as An steps in, things are going to change. We can see that An wants to overthrow the matriarchal royalty and enforce his own rule. This marks an important separation in the history of the Sumerian gods and of the gods in general. On the one hand, there is the matriarchal energy with Tiamat, with Sophia's energy. And on the other hand, these new gods, fresh out of the matrices, male gods who are going to revolt against Tiamat. We see Enlil going to fight Tiamat, enforcing his power. And this is what we find in the Enuma Elish.
The Sumerian texts suggest that Tiamata was defeated by Enlil, and he takes over as ruler to instill the principles of the false god. In the Gnostic text, however, it suggests that the Sophia energy that embodied Tiamata was not defeated, but rather ignored, and the knowledge of her existence was taken over by the knowledge of the demiurge. The Gnostic texts explain to us that we have been under the influence of this great archon who is not the true creator he fashions himself to be. And because of this, we suffer greatly under our own false reality. But the Sumerian texts remind us that throughout this battle of humanity, there's given to us an ally by the name of Enki, who fights to keep the Sophia frequency alive.
It is important to know that the so-called Gnostic texts, the ones from Nag Hammadi, were all excavated in Egypt. That is crucial information because the character of Enki lived for a while in ancient Mesopotamia, but after a while was in such disagreement with Enlil that he left for Egypt. He attempted civilizing mankind. He is then found under the name of Osiris. These archives, probably created by Enki, usually depict events that took place prior to the ones that we find in Sumerian texts. They are about the creation before creation itself.
There is a return of the Sophia to the Logos, or the Godhead. And when that return happens, it is described as being this incredible burst of light that actually changes the very fabric of the bodies themselves. This to me sounds like another example of the widespread prophecies that we see of this energy release from the sun. Greek and Roman philosophers often called the eparosis, a massive fiery release from the sun. So when we're looking at this story of Sophia and her redemption, it seems that it is another example of the prophecies that go all the way back to the Greek text, the Hindu text, in which we go through some sort of massive transformation and this sort of fallen state of our solar system or humanity, and then brought back up to a higher spiritual level in some way.
Could the Gnostic texts be supporting the meaning behind the Sumerian creation story? If the Gnostic texts are able to explain our possible beginning as humans and our current state of simulated reality, why do we still feel lost in the system? And will all this understanding of who we are and why we are here return?
It's hidden. You can't really perceive it. It hasn't become substantiated yet. It's becoming substantiated through this life process that we're living, which is kind of like, I like to think that we live in the greatest story ever told. Like all these myths we're living it right now. It's a living mythology. And it's also a collective universe. It's all integrated. Like there's nothing, the only thing that separates us from each other and from nature and from the divine is our own misguided perception.
Our misguided perception may have been the work of the ancient gods, but there is more evidence to support that the original creators of the Garden of Eden might have planted a seed on Earth. Few symbols convey the mysteries of ancient consciousness more potently than the Great Sphinx of Giza. Just south of the Great Pyramid on the west bank of the Nile River, this mythical limestone creature has the body of a lion and the head of a human. The Sphinx is the oldest known monumental sculpture in Egypt. According to mainstream scholars, it was built by ancient Egyptians during the reign of the pharaoh Khafre between the dates 2558 and 2532 BC. But in 1992, author and independent Egyptologist John Anthony West claimed that the Great Sphinx of Giza was not carved in 2500 BC, but 9,000 to 10,000 years earlier, before Egypt was a desert, and even before the dawn of man as we know it. While studying the works of 1920s scholar Schwaller de Lubitz, John Anthony West discovered that conventional Egyptologists had overlooked an important detail. The body of the Sphinx bore distinct markings of water erosion. If it was water erosion, then the entire history of ancient man would have to be rewritten. The conversation was a controversial subject the Oxford geologist didn't want to get involved with. This did little to deter John West from wanting to solve the mystery. If the Great Sphinx of Egypt was built thousands of years earlier than was written in mainstream history, could the water erosion marks he had examined shed new light on the creation of the human race? Determined to find out, John sought other scientists willing to join his quest. His search led him to Professor Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University.
I first went to see the Sphinx in 1990, and I noticed immediately that there was a disconnect because the weathering and erosion that I saw on the Sphinx was not compatible with Sahara desert hyper-arid conditions. What I was seeing, I was convinced, was precipitation weathering and erosion from rainfall, from water beating down on it. Now, how do you have that when it's been Sahara desert for 5,000 or more years? So immediately I saw this anomaly, and the logical conclusion I had, again, virtually immediately, was that the Sphinx must go back to an earlier climatic regime.
Can the water erosion marks that John West discovered stand alone to prove the Sphinx was constructed before 2500 BC? In 2008, geoarchaeologists Manashev and Parkhomenko argued that through their research of the analyzation of erosion on the Sphinx, They figured it actually was part of a civilization much older.
Two Ukrainian geologists believe that the Sphinx, which is on the edge of the plateau at Giza, could be as much as 800,000 years old. Why do they believe this? What they propose is that originally the Mediterranean Sea extended all the way to the plateau of Giza and lapped up against the Sphinx to create the distinctive weathering patterns that we see. I think that they could be right about the weathering, but I think that we're talking about the Sphinx before it was actually carved into what we see today. There was a rocky promontory or knoll at that site, which obviously was later used to carve the Sphinx, and that would have had weathering patterns on it. And almost certainly that does date back hundreds of thousands of years and could well have been weathered by water at some point in the past, but certainly that was not in the recent past.
As theories about how old the Sphinx is continue, Robert Schoch has found his research keeps leading him back in time. Since he first traveled to Giza in 1992, Professor Robert Schoch's research has taken his first dating of the Sphinx even further. His most recent geological and seismic findings have convinced him that the Great Sphinx could have been carved as far back as 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age.
We know geologically and from studies of ancient climatology that prior to about 3,000, what is now Sahara was much more moist, much more temperate, much more rainfall. So I concluded that had to go back at least to that earlier period. My initial estimate was 5,000 to 7,000 BC. This was very, very radical at the time. The Egyptologists were livid about this. They were saying all kinds of nasty things about me, calling me a pseudoscientist because they said this was absolutely impossible because there's no civilization when you go back to 5,000 to 7,000 BC that could construct the Sphinx. Since then, I've continued my studies. I've carried on with this. I've actually reanalyzed the seismic data, and I'm convinced at this point, for a number of technical reasons, that actually the seismic data suggests that we have to go back to at least around 10,000 BC. And this also fits much better the climatic regime and gives enough time for the erosion and weathering that we're seeing.
When could the Sphinx have been exposed to what turns out, what needs to have been about 1,000 years of very heavy rainfall? But there was no rainfall like that in Egypt in the time of the pharaohs either. The Giza Plateau was as dry 4,500 years ago as it is today. And yet here is a structure that has been heavily weathered by rainfall, which has fallen on it for a long period of time. You have to go back, more than 11,500 years. You have to go back to 12,000 years, really, to get the kind of climate conditions in that part of the Sahara that would have been capable of causing that level of erosion on the Sphinx. The rainfall erosion is most visible on the trench that surrounds the Sphinx. Nobody bothered to restore that. And there you can see this undulating profile and cuts through it. It's classic rainfall-induced weathering. And the Sphinx's body has been repaired again and again down the journey. It wasn't just in the Old Kingdom it was repaired. There were more repairs done in the New Kingdom as well. And right down into more recent times, they're still restoring the core body of the Sphinx today. This alone should have alerted archaeologists to the fact that there's a problem, because some of the most extensive restorations of the Sphinx, when blocks were applied to that rock-hewn core body of the Sphinx to repair damage, some of those date from the Old Kingdom. They date from 2,500 BC. Now, if you made your Sphinx in 2,500 BC, what on earth are you doing restoring it massively in 2000? It should be pristine.
Gregg Braden adds another layer to the dating of the Sphinx.
When we look at the mystery of the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau, in the traditional dating of only 4,000 years. Where that no longer makes sense is the erosion on the Sphinx has now been proven by Robert Schoch to be fluvial erosion rather than aeolian erosion. And fluvial means vast amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time, where aeolian erosion would be wind blowing and eroding over long periods of time. Robert Schoch showed beyond any reasonable doubt that it is water erosion that has created the Sphinx. His findings were accepted by AAPG, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. They looked at the evidence and they said, of course, this makes perfect sense. We have no problem with this. The historians have a huge problem because the last time there were vast amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time is when the ice melted from the last ice age, and that is now being dated in that part of Egypt between 7,000 and 9,000 years before present. So I think the evidence strongly supports that the Sphinx was in place when that water was melting. What it doesn't account for is the ice age was there for 20,000 years. Was the Sphinx built before the ice happened and subject to the erosion, or was the Sphinx built while the ice was in place? And we don't know the answer to that yet.
Some researchers suggest that the Sphinx could have been built during the precessional cycle, even before the current one, giving it the date of 36,000 BC.
John Anthony West's view is that actually it's not marking 12,500 years ago. It's marking the precessional cycle before that, the previous age of Leo, which would be 25,920 years before that. The age of Leo recurs every 25,920 years. So the astronomy doesn't absolutely commit us to the date of 12,500 years ago, but what does, I think, commit us to the date of 12,500 years ago is the geology, the way that the Sphinx is measured, and the fact that that was a very rainy period in Egypt. If you wind back the ancient skies to 10,500 BC, you go over to Giza and you find that two constellations are modeled on the ground there. One is the constellation of Orion, the belt stars of Orion in the positioning of the three great pyramids, and the other is the constellation of Leo with the great Sphinx gazing due east. And the strangest thing is that you again get a lock, not in 2,500 BC when Giza is supposed to have been created. None of it works then. You have to go back 12,500 years to 10,500 BC to get Leo locking perfectly with the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox. It's the age of Leo. It's as though the lion-bodied Sphinx is looking at its own celestial counterpart in the sky. And the constellation of Orion due south on the meridian in exactly the pattern of the three pyramids on the ground. And that only happens 12,500 years ago.
Could the Sphinx and the pyramids have been built at the same time? If so, could the ancient civilization that built it be marking a very important time for our current human race?
Now, with modern computer software, we can look at the ancient skies in any period we wish. It's interesting when we switch from geology to astronomy, and we start looking at the Sphinx and the pyramids as astronomically connected monuments. And we can't do otherwise, because the Sphinx, as I mentioned, is perfectly aligned on due east. Perfect. That's the work of people who are studying the sky.
The temple has to be a mirror image of the cosmos. In other words, you have to represent what you're actually looking at. A great example, of course, is the Sphinx. Looks at its mirror image on the horizon at the spring equinox, 10,500 BC. Boom.
Robert Schoch challenges the conventional explanation behind the Sphinx being constructed in 2500 BC.
It's been claimed that the face of the Sphinx is the face of the pharaoh Khafra or Chepra, so that would date to 2500 BC. But all of this is really very circumstantial. I think there's a very good possibility that the Sphinx was not a Sphinx originally, but it was a lion. So a lion's body with a lion's head, that the human head is a reconstruction or recarving. Maybe the head's been recarved more than once. But if you think about it as a lion, during the age of Leo, at the end of the last ice age, circa 10,000 or so BC, you had the Sphinx facing its essentially own image in the sky on the vernal equinox. And I think this was something that may have been incredibly significant.
What would be the purpose of such a marker at the Giza Plateau? Is there an unseen power that generations later tried to capture?
The idea of a lion image as an important sacred notion in a solar worshiping culture is completely understandable. First of all, the constellations in the heavens, so we're looking upward for inspiration. And the image of a lion is a very strong, courageous, noble quality. So to put the head of a pharaoh on the body of a lion is to acknowledge that the pharaoh has these great, powerful qualities. This is carved out of bedrock. Not only is the leader's energy united with the image of a lion, it is also united with the earth. So we have powerful imagery of integration going on in the great Sphinx of Giza.
Could there be a different kind of power we haven't yet been able to understand attached with the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau?
Well, it's bizarre. I mean, these are gigantic monuments, left totally uninscribed, not even the name of the supposed pharaoh. No architect's name, nothing. It doesn't have hieroglyphs, it doesn't have inscriptions. But they do speak, once you understand that the language that is being incorporated, or the designer who used the language, used mathematics and astronomy.
If the Sphinx was a powerful image, built only to reflect its magnificence from the surface of the earth to its celestial home, why would it be uninscribed? Why would the creators not explain its purpose? That answer might lie below its feet. Robert Schoch describes how his investigations led him to another significant discovery.
Below the Sphinx, I was looking for subsurface weathering features, mineralogical changes. We also found a number of anomalies. One of the anomalies, probably the most important and significant, is under the left paw of the Sphinx. And it is, for as what we can tell from the seismic, I'm quite convinced that it is a cavity, but not a natural cavity, artificial cavity or chamber under the left paw. Our initial analysis indicates that there is something in it, so it's not an empty cavity.
John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, in the very brief period that they had access to the Sphinx, they ran side-scan sonar survey all around it. And what was discovered beneath the left forepaw of the Sphinx, down at a depth of about 30 or 40 feet into the bedrock beneath the left forepaw of the Sphinx, is a very large, clearly man-made chamber. As soon as the Egyptian authorities discovered what they were really doing, they threw them off the site, and they weren't allowed to continue with their work. Do perhaps the Egyptian authorities or the Egyptian archaeologists and their colleagues in Western archaeology, do they perhaps already know? I mean, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but there have subsequently been drilling and investigation projects under the Sphinx, which have been passed off as being to do with clearing groundwater from under the Sphinx. But I wonder if that's what they were really doing. I don't think we're being told the whole truth about what is happening at Giza.
If that might be true, could the Great Sphinx be guarding human behavior recorded for thousands or millions of years?
One thing I would anticipate finding, if there is something in those chambers beneath the Sphinx, is the records of those earlier civilizations that existed on this planet. Plato, the Greek philosopher, said that the Greek lawmaker Solon once went to Egypt, and he was speaking with one of the Egyptian high priests. And the Egyptian high priest asked about the history of the Greek people. And Solon said, in the beginning, humans were created, then there was a big flood, a big catastrophe, and after that, they were created again. And the Egyptian priest began laughing. He explained to Solon that actually there have been many devastations in the long history of the world, and the earth has been repopulated again and again and again over the course of many millions of years. And he said, you Greeks just remember the last one, but there have been many before that. And he said to Solon, you've lost the records of these earlier histories. The Egyptian priest said, we have those records of those earlier histories.
These things that are still there underground were so vast that he was really perplexed, and he asked the Egyptian priest who was taking him around, who built these things? And their reply to him was, they were built by the crocodile kings. Now that might be a perfect definition of what the Anunnaki were, because we do see a lot of depictions of them with reptilian features and things like that. It may be at one point whoever built that chamber and hid what I believe might be the Hall of Records of the Egyptian priesthood, then chose to actually bury that up. We might find writings from them, tablets, ways of using their knowledge that they knew we wouldn't be able to get to until a certain point in our evolution where we would be able to get down to these chambers and pull out what was there.
If there really is a chamber guarding the secrets of humanity, why haven't we been allowed to have it? Graham Sear explains that the Sphinx tests the soul before it can be embodied in the great knowing.
The Sphinx, to me, represents kind of the holder of esoteric knowledge and the mystery of existence. It's sort of the watcher at the gates to heaven who tests the soul on their merit before they're able to re-enter the garden. It's sort of like the cherubim who, with the flaming swords, guard the entrance to Eden to make sure that the soul is pure enough to re-enter. So that's one aspect of the Sphinx. To me, it also kind of represents the integration of angelic natures with human natures.
If the Sphinx does mark the gateway to secret knowledge about our planet, left by an ancient high civilization, then could it be that, by design, it is intended to remain dormant until modern civilization is ready to see the universe differently? Graham Hancock suggests this question is partially answered by understanding the symbolism in Egyptian artworks.
The ancient Egyptians had I think, a beautiful way of looking at human life. This was a forgiving culture. They understood human frailty. We are not perfect. We do not enter life perfect. We are going to make mistakes. And the question is, do we learn from those mistakes? What do we do with the lessons that duality has to teach us? Do we integrate those lessons into our life subsequently, or do we just ignore them and carry on as before?
Now, these sites are very controversial. All of them are, because they force historians to rethink the traditional story. When we begin to look at a cyclic model of civilization rather than the linear model that says civilization began 5,000 years ago, it opens the door to explanations to many of the things that look simply mysterious to us and make no sense at all, such as the discovery of entire cities under the surface of the ocean that we find in multiple places throughout the world.
If the great ancient knowledge in the chamber below the paw of the Sphinx is inaccessible, perhaps the same knowledge may exist in a different location, or even in a different frequency. Healer and author Sonia Grace describes a mystical encounter meeting the ancient solar deity Sekhmet during a remote vision.
When I spirit traveled to the Great Sphinx, it was back in time. My guides took me, and we arrived around 15,000 BC. We were met by Sekhmet herself. She was standing there. She's huge. She's like 20 feet tall. She's enormous. And she invited us inside and took us down, going into the earth, a long tunnel, this deep tunnel passageway. It went this way, it went that way, it went this way again, and it opened out into a huge room. And she said, this was the portal for my people. She says, my people came here long before the Egyptian gods. She said this Sphinx was a carving of a lion. It was not the dog Anubis, it was a lion. And she said it's because we come from the Leo constellation, and it was created as a site for her people, meaning X marks the spot, this is the portal. So this is where her people would literally transport to where they were from in the Leo constellation.
If the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid are just the tip of the iceberg of our understanding of humanity on this planet, could their existence be a reminder to dig deeper? But when, if ever, will this knowledge be available to all mankind?
For all its technology and all its progress and all the amazing stuff we have, we live in a very fractured, very dangerous world right now, where the whole of human achievement could be put at jeopardy by, for example, a massive nuclear war. We have the toys to do that, to bring humanity back to the Stone Age in a matter of days. And it's possible that we could do so, that we don't really know why we're here or what we're doing. We have an illusion about what it is. And that illusion is locked deep in the past. That's where it began. And we need to recover the truth about ourselves.
Could the knowledge preserved be by the clan of Osiris? Is there a link between the Egyptian gods and Enki's mission to help mankind's advancement towards a higher culture? Could that specific knowledge be below the Sphinx?
The Great Pyramid in particular contains mathematical, a sort of mathematical code. We know for sure, for example, that astronomy and mathematics was used. The question is why. It's a sort of, well, it's a universal language. If ever we are contacted or we contact extraterrestrials somewhere else in the cosmos, the only way we can communicate is through mathematics and astronomy. Astronomy will give them location, sort of GPS if you like, and mathematics will be the dialogue between us. So this monument is speaking ET, if you like. It's actually speaking a universal language. We have to come to terms with that, and we have to ask the question, is it something that developed purely earthbound, or is it a contact? The questions are legitimate today.
Maybe once we tap into a different dimension, we will be able to read the code. Some believe there are locations on the planet that open portals to another dimension of our current reality.
What we do know is in places like the Cairo Museum in Egypt, a number of artifacts have been found from sites such as Saqqara, for example, that scientists simply cannot explain.
Astrophysicists Duncan Lorimer and Maura McLaughlin stumbled upon a strangely flickering star. Its radiation pulsed so brightly, they were unable to match it to any known object in the universe. As the story made the headlines, scientists around the world were baffled. Then, astronomers at the Green Bank Telescope confirmed that these light signals were emanating from a star in the Cygnus constellation, 1,200 light-years away. This fluctuating star was catalogued KIC 8462852 and named Tabby Star in honor of Tabitha Suzanne Boyajian, the first astronomer who wrote about it.
Amongst the 100,000 stars that was dipping its light, or flux as they call it, periodically. Now this is something which happens if a planet moves in front of a star. You get a very slight dip in the amount of light that's reaching us. In this case, the dips were anything up to 22%. Now, if I can put this into perspective, if, let's say, Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, crosses in front of the Sun, if you were looking at it from afar, it would dip the light only about 1%. So something that was dipping the light anything up to 22% is going to be huge, massive, something that is totally different, something that we've not encountered before in astronomy. So what was going on?
Since 2015, the answer to this question has garnered the attention of astronomers, scientists, and space enthusiasts alike. and a myriad of explanations have been offered, but none have been conclusive. What is really odd about this mystery is that, uncharacteristically, even the most staunch scientists have not discounted a popular hypothesis that the expansive object interrupting Tabby Star's brightness could be built by an advanced spacefaring civilization. Astoundingly, the BBC have even released a documentary advocating this theory. Could it really be true?
Then in 2016, a new burst was detected. The distinctive pulse of radio waves released as the neutron stars collided and were destroyed. Followed by nothing. Silence.
The BBC have shown for the first time a documentary not just about this star, but the fact that it almost certainly has an ET vessel, alien megastructure around it. We're not just talking about bacteria, we are talking about advanced civilizations, thousands of years more advanced than us down here on Earth. The question comes is that if there really is a structure around this star, how does it affect us down here? I mean, is it possible that these aliens have been in touch with us in some way in the recent past, or perhaps even in the distant past? And the question comes down to communication. The star is approximately 1,300 light years from our solar system, which means that when we're looking towards it, anything we see happened 1,300 years ago. So that's around 700 AD. You know, the Maya civilization was still in full flight. When they look at us, of course, they are also looking at that same time frame, around 700 AD.
Linda Moulton Howe's theory suggests that the Mayan civilization was created in a hybridized program and then simply disappeared, possibly off-planet. Oddly enough, this connects to the same time frame with the Tabby star. Could there be an ancient civilization that once lived on Earth, trying to connect with us?
I will be sought out by some people who have worked for the CIA, NSA, DIA. There was a man who had said that he had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and he said that was the Mayan civilization created in a hybridized program, that there was a collaboration teaching that all of the mathematical skills from history, then in 850 AD. It wasn't drought. It wasn't human war. This man said to me, for reasons unknown, the Ebens came in 850 AD, and they took the majority of their hybridized Mayans in a large craft and left Earth.
Could the Mayan disappearance and the Tabby star anomaly be linked? Or could this mystery in the sky actually have a more ancient connection? An ancient connection that some believe taps into the codes of our planet.
Those astronomers, they also said that these dips in the light could also be used to broadcast information, whether this information be binary, whether it be prime numbers, or some other form of attention-seeking information, which a species like ourselves, humanity, could recognise as intelligent, as universal information. The work that I'm carrying out suggests that there is intelligence in the broadcasts, and that it may well be that it is giving us not just prime numbers or binary, but very specific mathematical formula. What I have determined is that there are certain cycles associated with the Kepler data. They are all interlinked, and they all reflect certain key numbers. All of them are multiples of 11. Now, this may be just a very simple piece of information, but what's so interesting is that we find that this is associated with the most complex mathematical formula that we have down here on Earth. For instance, Pascal's triangle is made up of multiples of 11. It's like a pyramid of numbers, the first number being 1, the second number being 11, the third number being 121, the fourth number being 1331, 11 squared, 11 cubed, etc., etc. These are exactly the same numbers that are being broadcast from the KIC star right at this moment. This is where it gets weird, because the Great Pyramid is obviously one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world. Certain researchers, colleagues, have found within it certain key numbers that keep cropping up again and again. And those numbers are the exact numbers that are being broadcast by this star, KIC 8462852. Is this a coincidence? The Great Pyramid and its two neighbours are aligned to exactly the same constellation as where this star is, which is Cygnus.
And yet, just 1,000 miles northeast, another megalithic site that is much older also points to the Cygnus constellation. In fact, it's the largest and oldest megalithic site on Earth, Göbekli Tepe.
Is it also a coincidence that the oldest complex of stone monuments in the world at Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey is also aligned to the constellation of Cygnus? Is it also a coincidence that in some of the oldest cave art around the world we find evidence of this same constellation represented by celestial birds, by birdmen, birds on poles that are pointed and directed towards this constellation?
I wish we could get into the minds and into the heads of the people who made these sites all over the world in megalithic structures, that they are all concerned with lining themselves up to the rising point of the sun at certain times of the year. They're telling us something about our connection to the cosmos and our place on Earth.
Could Göbekli Tepe, the oldest megalithic structure on the planet, be revealing a code that would connect us not only to this anomaly in the sky, but also to other ancient sites around the world? Translated into English, Göbekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill. In 1994, Klaus Schmidt, an archaeologist from Germany, began digging into this unnatural-looking bluff. A few feet below the surface, he discovered stone ruins. Further investigation revealed that this ancient formation in southern Turkey was 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, throwing into question much of what has been written in the history books. Klaus Schmidt dedicated his life's work to uncovering what might lie below the surface and continued to excavate until he, mysteriously, died in 2014. 95% of the ruins are still buried, and the true purpose of Göbekli Tepe and its relationship to the galaxy is still an unsolved mystery.
Most archaeologists believe the site is about 13,000 years old, and they believe it existed for a couple of thousand years, and then it was deliberately buried. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it could date back much further than that, because there is evidence in Turkey that humans like us existed millions of years ago.
Gregg Braden points out that more evidence is being uncovered, pushing back the date of antiquity. Could Göbekli Tepe be even older?
One of the consequences of global warming is that the ice on the poles has receded tremendously, including Antarctica. And the thickness of the ice, as it is reduced, allows greater visibility from Earth-penetrating radar, so we can see what's underneath the ice. But one of the surprises is that the satellite images are sending back now what appear to be large-scale, complex archaeological sites. So they're not small hunting villages and pit houses. These look like advanced technological civilizations that we're seeing underneath the ice. So as a scientist, I have to say one of two things happened. Either someone built these complex structures under the ice after it already formed, which is less likely, and the more likely scenario is that the structures existed and then the ice covered them. Right now, civilization, the date is being pushed back to 13,500 years. The last ice age ended 12,000 years ago. The historic context of civilizations going back 50, 60, 70,000 years along these 5,000-year cycles shows up in the mythology. Maybe the mythology is based on much more fact than we've been led to believe in the past, or that we've been willing to embrace in the past.
If indeed it could be older than mainstream scientists believe, then what could be its purpose?
Göbekli Tepe is the oldest stone circle complex in the world. If you can imagine Stonehenge in England and transpose it onto the top of a mountaintop in southeast Turkey, and then multiply it by at least 20 times, and then cover the stones with beautiful carvings of animals and representations of abstract humans, and give them T-shaped tops, because that's what the stones have there. This is what Göbekli is. It was constructed at the very end of the last ice age, around 9,500 BC, and was in use for a period of around 1,500 years before it was abandoned about 8,000 BC. What's so interesting is that the oldest and the most accomplished, technologically advanced stone enclosures, and that alone gives us evidence of possibly a lost civilization. The fact is that Göbekli Tepe is in northern Mesopotamia. The area around Urfa and Haran and Göbekli Tepe. This is clearly the cradle of civilization. This is where the Anunnaki had their power base.
I am on a trip with geologist Robert Schoch, who had his PhD in Yale University, and we are standing down inside of the excavation at Göbekli Tepe, surrounded by these 19-foot tall limestone pillars, each weighed up to 15 tons, and they're in rings. And in that process of standing there and talking about this is the most baffling place. It doesn't feel like anything that humans can understand. Robert Schoch said, I've been staring at these T structures and thinking about the old past and what could this have been built for? And he said, all of these limestone pillars have T tops. And he said, it reminds me of tuning forks. And he said, Linda, when you stand up at the top of the hill and you realize that Göbekli Tepe was built in a bowl, you're always looking down at the top of these big T pillars unless you climb down into, and then you're among them. And he said, what if this whole place was built to resonate with certain frequencies by something above, resonating frequencies on big pillars put in rings?
When you look at Göbekli Tepe and you see all of the constructions of the inscriptions of all of the animals of the earth on these giant pillars, it's always been interesting to me that perhaps what these things were a way of recording a standing wave pattern of a certain kind of a life form. For instance, a crocodile exists on a different standing wave pattern than a crane, than an elephant, than a monkey. And perhaps what they were trying to do was, out of a state of preservation, trying to preserve these things, they were trying to preserve stones that actually had those frequencies recorded into them.
Could Göbekli Tepe have been an ancient portal constructed to communicate with gods in faraway galaxies? Is it possible that Tabby's star could be a signal for humans to pay attention to this gateway?
There is, for example, evidence of very clear, very precise astronomy at Göbekli Tepe. It contains, amongst other things, the world's first perfectly north-south aligned building. You can't do that without astronomy. There are alignments to specific star groups and specific moments of the year. It's a highly evolved site.
Shamanic cultures right the way across the Eurasian continent saw the northern celestial pole as the point of exit from the physical world and the point of entry into the sky world. And it was seen as a whole, quite literally a whole, connecting the different universes, the middle world to the upper world. It would seem as if this stone is a signboard showing that journey and the actual course, the route that you would take to reach the sky world. I believe that one of the indicators to our earliest ancestors of a place of great power was the appearance of mysterious lights. It's known that a lot of strange light phenomena is seen in those very mountains where Göbekli Tepe is sighted. We call them UFOs today, but these type of phenomena have been occurring for many, many thousands of years, arguably since the beginning. I think that our ancestors would have seen these as important signs that here were places where you could establish points of contact, portals, if you like, with the other world, and that by building your monuments here, that link with the stars would be stronger. The downloads of information that create civilization would be stronger. Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe is a signboard for the shaman who would be achieving altered states of consciousness within the enclosures and then journeying in an astral form to the upper world.
Perhaps a deeper understanding of the relationship of these ancient monuments to Tabby Star and other galaxies is the key to understanding who built them and why.
You know, I've not examined aerial views of Göbekli Tepe, but the fact that some researchers are equating that with a star map that depicts our relationship would be a perfect match for not only the Egyptian culture, but for what we've discovered in the construction of the pyramids themselves and the fact that this harmonic relationship exists between this star. And it could very well be that what that cosmology was meant to encapsulate and describe is this idea that our star is interacting harmonically with these other stellar bodies. And it could be that this ancient extraterrestrial race that came to visit here not only understood that, but are following that as a sort of harmonic map around the universe.
If it is indeed true that Göbekli Tepe is a gateway to other galaxies, then perhaps somehow its architects knew a global catastrophe was imminent and buried this ancient technology to protect it.
As the excavations continued, a number of surprising things began to become clear. First off, this pot-bellied hill and this whole site had not been covered up by natural sedimentation. After being in use for about 1,000 years, it was deliberately buried by whoever was involved with it. This was not some invading army who came in and smashed it up. This was in a kind of preservation. You must envisage teams of hundreds of people with sort of buckets filled with stone and rubble, and they're coming and they're pouring it in on top of the existing stone circles. And they just keep on pouring until every stone circle is covered.
Could the knowledge that has been covered up preserved the mythology from almost every ancient culture?
Göbekli Tepe is a kind of it's like a potpourri of cultures. You see a lot of Sumerian influence. There's a lot of Egyptian symbolism in Göbekli Tepe as well. There's Hindu influence in there as well, Japanese. And the fact is, this is where you start getting into this grey area. Where does it come from? Was there a world's book, a central point where everybody got their ideas from? It seems to me that Göbekli Tepe is almost like a microcosm of so many cultures around the world that supposedly never shared information with each other. And now we begin to realize actually they got around much more than we gave them credit for.
Could the big secret at Göbekli Tepe be the connection of every culture from around the world? And could it have been discovered at the right time to reveal information? There are many who believe uncovering the answers to these questions will transform how we understand ourselves.
I would be lying if I said I knew what was exactly buried at Göbekli Tepe, but I think what you can do is draw a lot of similarities and parallels to some of these other megalithic sites and get some pretty decent scientific insight into what they were trying to accomplish. And what it looks like they were trying to accomplish is the preservation of this scientific knowledge, maybe at a time when there was just such global upheaval that the only way to preserve it was to bury it. Could very well be why they purposely buried the entire site. You're going to construct a megalithic site of that kind of grandeur and scale and put that kind of effort into it, and then you're going to turn around and just bury it. Why would any society do that?
But whoever built Göbekli Tepe, the fact that they buried that very important 30 acres of these rings of all of these limestone columns meant somebody, something knew that something potentially destructive to the whole planet, and they didn't want Göbekli Tepe destroyed. But Göbekli Tepe survived until the 1990s.
Although Göbekli Tepe's discovery in 1990 was groundbreaking, research has been problematic given the dangerous upheaval in the area and the knowledge that still stays buried. But perhaps the discovery of the Tabi star has become a beacon for knowledge still preserved at Göbekli Tepe, pointing us in a direction to uncover some human truths.
I think it is our responsibility to preserve those records that are being destroyed in this cradle of civilization, in the Tigris-Euphrates, in Iraq, in Syria, in Turkey, because they are very intentionally being destroyed in some cases to wipe out the memory of these past civilizations for a number of reasons. But once they're gone forever. And I think it's very sad to see what's happening, and I think it's a wake-up call. We've taken for granted for so long the fact that these records are here and that they exist. We never really considered that they could be destroyed so easily.
If they actually got the funding and got the effort and they excavated the rest of that 95% of that site, I'm pretty sure what it's going to do is answer a whole lot of mysteries about these other megalithic sites. And the reason why I say that is because here's a site that's completely preserved, as far as we know. It may be an actual perfect construction of the science that they were trying to save. And if that ends up being the case, then I think what you'll see is a resurgence all through humanity and a real effort to try to rediscover what it was that we're now missing, that we are a species living with amnesia of what this science was. And it's simply because we've had such a turbulent history as a species, war after cataclysm after cataclysm, the Library of Alexandria being burned. All of those things mean that we've lost more knowledge maybe than we even possess right now. And a lot of that knowledge, when you really begin to study these ancient sites, can be regained. And I'm hoping that's what takes place with Göbekli Tepe. We've got a lot of mysterious cities built out of stone around the world, but that kind of structure, and only 5% of it has been excavated, means that below that is such a massive amount to be found.
I think Göbekli Tepe has many more secrets to reveal. The astronomy of the site is something that a number of researchers are beginning to look into, and I think that's going to be That's going to be one of the keys to help us understand what was going on at Göbekli Tepe. But there's nothing to beat plain old-fashioned excavation, and that site needs to be dug up. I feel that Göbekli Tepe is potentially so important for unraveling the origins of our present civilizations that we really need to expose the whole site and understand absolutely what's going on there. It may change many things about how we view ourselves and our past.
There's something more beyond that, that some part of us comes from the stars themselves, and that at the point of incarnation, that something, we call it the soul or the spirit, embodies within flesh and blood and exists, and that this gives us this connection to the stars, that the soul or spirit actually comes from an extraterrestrial or a starry source.
What else lies buried inside the pot-bellied grounds at Göbekli Tepe? Are there more secrets about the true origins of mankind to be unearthed? Are we being prompted by the communication with Tabby Star to dig deeper and connect with these ancient sites? Could there be some kind of code that interlocks celestial locations with monuments on Earth? Would it be possible Göbekli Tepe could be the ultimate smoking gun when it comes to connecting these ancient monuments across the globe and the truth on why they exist? And could it reveal a message that helps us understand our current civilization and how to continue humanity on this planet? Researchers continue to gather data, but the answer may still lie buried beneath the dirt. As the unraveling of these mysteries continue, some interesting evidence begins to emerge from some unusual locations. One such place has one of the largest stones carved by human hands at 1,650 tons.
Baalbek is one of the big enigmas of which there is very little answers. We're talking about a huge complex.
Around the Temple of Jupiter, there used to be 54 columns. 54, what's the significance of that?
Could this number sequence help reveal a code at Baalbek? And is it possible it could be more evidence of an ancient message?